Ghostwire Tokyo is far from the best game to come out this year. That's kind of not its fault, seeing as how the year started off with a barrage of amazing titles, but even despite that, I'd say the mark this game's left on the industry has been faint at best, and we're only a few months removed from its release. In fact, I think I could probably name 10 other games that came out this year that are either better or generated more discussion than Ghostwire did, except I don't want to think about it right now, so I'm just gonna leave it to my editor, who's just, me 3 hours from now. Did we get a full list? Did we hit 10? Because I don't know how to end this point since I haven't actually thought of the games yet, so if you could let me know. What did you say? Say that again. Say it to my face. Say it again, I dare you. That's what I thought. But seriously, considering this is a Bethesda-published, high-budget console exclusive, you'd assume that it would have made more of an imprint on the industry than it actually did, and it's a bit of a shame that this is the fate that it suffered, because I actually think the building blocks of what this game is deserves another mainstream attempt, as long as it's one that better understands the power of accented horror. See, I'm not too much of a horror guy, not because I'm too scared to watch scary movies or play scary games. I don't think I'm that bad. At worst, I'm like slightly frightened squirrel, but they always came off like they had one dimension. I'm not trying to throw shade at people who enjoy the genre, but I have a similar problem with straight-up comedy movies. The best ones have actual themes and interesting plot lines outside of the jokes, like Superbad and the Jump Street movies, but the vast majority of them are just big joke machines, so they fall flat. Which is why some of the funniest pieces of media are ones where the comedy isn't necessarily the sole focus, like Succession. I think the only horror game that I've enjoyed is Until Dawn because of its novelty and goofiness, but I was never all that interested in your Slenders, your FNAFs, or your Outlasts. I feel like they were providing me with only a short range of entertainment, but what happens when you take something that can feel one-dimensional and add it to an existing plane that doesn't overlap with it, like Punishing Melee game, or Underwater Superhero FPS, or Cute Story about a grieving father who finds someone to love again? You get 3 dimensions, baby. That's just, that's pure science right there. Aside from maybe rhythm, I think horror is the best complementary genre in existence. Not only does it usually contribute to a dreary and overpowering atmosphere, but it introduces a sense of tension that you can't really get from anything else. That's why the concept of an open-world action-adventure game mixed with horrifying enemies and creatively twisted visions is such an amazing one, but unfortunately it's also one that's wasted in this instance. Renowned game director Shinji Mikami, who is responsible for both the first and fourth Resident Evil games among other things, founded Tango Gameworks in 2010, with the studio's first project being The Evil Within. The team then worked on a follow-up and later unveiled Ghostwire Tokyo in 2019 with this creepy, beautiful CGI trailer that really focused on the game's horror elements, but the tone around it closer to release began to change. Mikami mentioned how he didn't want Tango to be somewhat typecast as a horror studio and hoped to defy those expectations and diversify the studio's output, even saying, "Some people may feel that Ghostwire Tokyo has a bit of a horror feel to it, but make no mistake, Ghostwire Tokyo is not a horror game. It is an arcade-style action-adventure game." And that is the feeling that Ghostwire Tokyo gives off. It doesn't feel like a horror game whatsoever, and given that that's in line with how Mikami described it, and there's obviously no issue with Tango wanting to diversify their roster of titles, that shouldn't be a problem. Except that the game clearly pulls from the horror genre in more ways than one, and has opted to water down those elements to the point that it becomes 2D once again, instead of abandoning it for a new style. Ghostwire has echoes of horror which seem so distant that their presence actively makes the game feel emptier. It would have been one thing if they moved on from horror altogether, but to include it in this state cripples an idea that could have been amazing. The streets of Tokyo are littered with specters with no faces and sometimes no heads, the roads are abandoned, and a dark fog is consuming the area, and yet none of this plays effectively because the game seems scared to interact with its own horror. Both exteriors and interiors are brightly lit, which never lets you feel immersed in this world that's meant to be dystopian, which is a shame because with all the bright lights that Tokyo provides, you could have easily created a sense of uneasiness by mixing in flickering lights and stretches where you were engulfed in darkness. For a city so notable for being alive and bright, it would have been so interesting to explore it as a husk of itself, but instead of feeling like a place where the population was devastated by whatever ghostly nonsense is happening, it feels like everyone just went on a vacation at the same time, like it was National No SpongeBob Day or something. There are large stretches in this game that feel like wasted space, like this road here, and a change in lighting and some suggestive sound effects, your standard creaking and maybe a sudden slam as if someone was trying to break free from a car behind you, would go a long way in making these places feel more important without needing to place a side quest or Jesus statue or something there. A genuine fear of mine when walking home at night is that any one of the parked cars in the street has a maniac sitting in the darkness waiting to pounce out at me, so you can create a tinge of horror just by making things feel dark and empty, but that's not the case here. And if you didn't have that fear before, by the way, you're welcome. Including horror elements doesn't automatically make your game a horror game. I think a good example of this, especially in an open world setting, is is Arkham Knight, where the city is dark and imposing, the night is full of grisly murders. The fear toxin has a severe and brutal effect on Gotham citizens, and you even have a few jump scares thrown at you. My favorite being the Man-Bat, who just shows up during the open world a couple of times while you're grappling, scares the bahonkies out of you, and flies away. I don't think anyone immediately associates Arkham Knight with the horror genre, but it utilizes elements of it to strengthen the dark and spooky atmosphere of the story. Right off the bat, Ghostwire decides to take its Slender-like enemy design and put it under bright lights. There's nothing scary about these dudes, even though they're designed to be kinda spooky. I wish they would emerge from the shadows, or their stealth kill animations were taken further, like them grabbing and clawing at you in a last-ditch effort to survive, to really sell the fear factor of it all, but instead they hold none of the gravitas and pure presence that you'd expect from such a haunting design. This surprise attack at a Torii Gate is clearly meant to scare you at least a little bit. I mean, you get whipped around to see a close-up of this crazy masked lady with giant scissors, but the sound design is so subdued that it fails to sell it. A lot of side quests are really simple, and despite that, they're on the verge of greatness, because Tango's built this world where objects can be hidden in the spirit realm, and you can find markings or floor plans that reveal where they might be, and uncovering them, seeing these ideas come to life in front of you is fun even in the most basic moments. But imagine if these rooms were all decrepit, the light bulbs were broken, you had to use the light from your hand as a guide, and you can hear the whispers of the spirit you're trying to catch in the walls. Ghostwire seems actively scared of being classified as a horror game because of the studio's fear of being pigeonholed, but it does a real disservice to the visual design and creative sequences shown off here to be so cautious with the horror elements. It's like seeing an identity crisis on screen, a weird middle stage between what they were and what they want to be. I think an open world game that features a healthy dose of horror sounds brilliant, especially one that takes place in a derelict version of a city known for its liveliness. And being the closest thing to a horror-infused open world game that we've seen, as far as I can remember at least, Arkham Knight does back up that claim. I've been itching for another world like this to explore, even if it has that cookie-cutter objective and map marker design that's catching more and more flack lately. I don't care. We tend to forgive the bad or uninspired aspects of games a lot more when they provide us with something incredible on the other end. I didn't really make this video because I was super passionate about Ghostwire necessarily. I made it because I'm passionate about horror as a secondary genre. The more I think about it, the more I realize that so many of my favorite games dip into horror, which is wild considering how ambivalent I am about the genre on its own. And I just hope that this idea can return in a sequel or a new IP from somebody else, because I think it would be so brilliant to take the genre that thrives off creating big environments that spurs on a sense of adventure and exploration and pair it with a style that makes you nervous when you turn a corner. If done well, that would be an incredible back and forth to have, and I think the genre deserves that. There's more ways to stop open world games from becoming stale than just emphasizing freedom, and I'd love to see more cracks at this concept that Ghostwire unfortunately left half-baked. What do you guys think? I know there was a lot of talk from reviewers about Ghostwire being bland because of its combat and world design, which are fair gripes that I tend to agree with, but I think those issues would have been a lot less glaring if the game had more of a concrete and effective identity, and I wanted to explore that lesser discussed side of the game's shortcomings. Also, what are your thoughts on horror as a secondary genre? Because I'm curious if people have the same love for it as I do. If you enjoyed the video, leave a like. If you're new here, subscribe, and I'll see you all next time. Peace.